The warning lights in the bridge of the Verderdon pulsed, a calming shade of blue-green, not the panicked crimson that most human navies used, so that the crew would feel less inclined to shout over one another. Captain Leora Nemo glanced across the leaf-strewn deck at her helmsman, Near, whose 4 vine-wrapped arms ghosted above the control surfaces like reeds disturbed by a passing fish. Beyond the bridge's translucent canopy, a scab of soot-thacked space awaited, speckled with stars and the glinting hull of the Imperial battleship Osprey-class Dominus Imperii. The dreadnought's prow guns were still cycling up, twin pearls of destructive light gathering in their emitters. Leora could almost taste the ozone discharge through recycled air. "Range?" she asked, quietly. 13,000 kilometers, answered Sensate Rom, whose antennae twitched as if to pluck the numbers straight from vacuum. "Their first volley will arrive in 112 seconds. Not enough time for a dash behind the asteroid field, certainly not enough to outrun a rail-accelerated lance meant to crack capital plating." Leora laid a hand on the bridge's central sycamore trunk, the living core of Verderdon, and felt the hum of stored potential quiver beneath its bark. "Armed Spore complement," she ordered. "We'll give them something to stare at besides us." A Susurrus traveled through the bridge as officers whispered acknowledgments. On other warships, the build-up to battle might include metallic clanks, servo whines, the belch of feed mechanisms. Verderdon, as with every vessel in the Garden Fleet, was quieter, almost gentle. The only audible signal that the ship was weaponizing itself was the deepening perfume of loam. Leora's first experience with Spore missiles had been in an academy simulator where, to pass, she'd needed to strike a moving target at close range, germinate a forest under point tension's fire, and survive boarding action. The instructors made it sound romantic. Seeds turned to saplings, saplings to trees, roots to boarding tubes, the husk of a foe blooming like a corrupted paradise. In reality, enough could go wrong to write epics. Rom's voice broke her memory. "Imperial salvo launched. 8 super lances and a staggered field of kinetic debris. Time to intercept, 90 seconds. Helm, skim us along their firing plane," Leora said. "But keep our spine aligned for broadside. Prepare to shed leaves." Helmsman Nair coaxed Verderdon into a graceful side slip, angled just enough that any oncoming projectile would meet the ship's curved, photosynthetic plating at a glancing kiss. The Garden Fleet called the maneuver a petal turn. Enemies tended to call it maddening. From the weapons pit came a soft chime. "Spore racks 1 through 7, loaded." "Fire!" 8 greenish motes shot from Verderdon's flanks, each no larger than an antique torpedo casing. They propagated an electro-photosynthetic sail as soon as they cleared the umbra of the ship, drinking greedily from reflected starlight and from the heat bloom of the Osprey-class's own reactor shroud. Tiny root tendrils extended behind them, sensing nothing yet but cold. The Imperials saw them, of course. Automated defenses stitched a lacing of tracers across the vacuum, each micro-round carrying a warhead designed to shriek apart biological ordnance. 2 Spore missiles shredded, disgorging harmless puffs of glittering pollen. The rest spiraled onward, weaving like drunken insects, until they met the broad titanium glassward hull of the Dominus Imperii. Leora waited, breath held, as the countdown reached 0. Then the enemy lances hit. The first spear of light parted Verderdon's outer foliage and gouged a trough through living bark, scorching the corridor leading to Hydroponics Bay 3. Automated sap patches flooded the wound, sealing micro-breaches before the second and third lances arrived. Their impacts were mercifully shallow. By the time they struck, Neor had rolled the ship, presenting thicker trunk shield. "Report," Leora said. "Outer canopy compromised," an officer replied. "Structural integrity 91%. We can take another 2 hits before exposing seed banks." "Let's not." Leora clenched her jaw. "How are the spores?" Rom projected a magnified view. Where the missiles had landed, the Dominus Imperii now sprouted finger-thick roots that clamped to armor plate. Bark plates unfurled from hull scars like the opening of alien eyes. Leaves tinged with cobalt chlorophyll turned toward the nearest stars, greedily siphoning energy, and from each anchor point extended fine, hair-like threads, boarding roots-seeking microcracks, seams, vents. The Imperial point-dense turrets still tracking Verdure Dawn suddenly found their lines of sight obscured. Where once they enjoyed a clean traverse, they now strained against encroaching vines. One turret fired wildly, shredding a thicket. The shredded growth released spores that coated optical sensors in resinous sludge. Another turret tried a plasma pulse, only to overheat as roots wicked away coolant lines, repurposing their flow to pump nutrient gel into growing bowls. "She's gone blind," Roan said, half in awe. "Most of her turrets can't paint targets anymore." "Open the garden door," Leora commanded. Deep in Verdure Dawn's belly, an aperture iris parted, and out of the darkness swam a flotilla of boarding pods, modeled after seed husks. Each contained 6 garden marines in symbiotic suits, ivory mycelial armor fused to human nerve endings, able to photosynthesize with minimal rations for weeks. The pods glided along the rails of the still-growing root network and attached themselves to the Dominus Imperii's hull-like fruit. Sergeant Myceli irritated for the very threads that encased her felt gravity vanished the instant the pod's lock cycled. She shared a glance with her squad, Pollard, Waxen, Dua, and Ashleaf twins. Their visors dimmed as the pod's outer shell sloughed away, revealing the labyrinth of plant matter the Spore missiles had birthed. Erie's suit chimed with confirmation. Atmosphere beyond hull is vacuum. Temperature -73 Celsius. Structural integrity variable. Proceed with caution. Roots have reached an exhaust manifold, Pollard reported, reading suit telemetry. We can melt through. Do it, Erie said. Torching an exhaust port on an Imperial battleship felt like asking death for a dance card, but the alternative was to try cutting fresh holes through meter-thick hull armor. Pollard wielded a fungal-based corrosive sprayer. The nozzle exhaled a web of bioluminescent microbes that digested metal faster than thermite. Within moments, the vent's lip sagged inward. The squad slipped into the newly chewed conduit, their suits secreting a layer of insulating sap to shield against sudden heat pulses from engines. Roots followed them, obedient vines guided by pheromonal tags in the Marines' boots. Inside the Dominus Imperii, corridors were straight as judgment, lit by white panels that hummed like angry wasps. Naval architecture here was a shrine to angles no curve, no color. Oxen felt as though she had entered the skeletal maw of some extinct rectangular beast. "Remember," she murmured over squad channel. "We want the command core. Sever the dreadnought's spine. She dies. We're gardeners. We prune." Oxen chuckled. "Best pruning shears in the quadrant." They reached an intersection guarded by an Imperial sentry drone. The machine's sensor cluster still half blind from external damage. Dua planted a seed grenade shaped like a walnut at the drone's base. The shell cracked, produced a gout of creeping ivy that swarmed camera nodes, shorted circuits, and silenced the machine before it could turn fully. "Clear," Dua said. Meanwhile, on Verdure Dawn's bridge, Leora watched status glyphs bloom beside each squad's call sign. 4 squads had entered. One, led by Captain Olea, was already reporting heavy resistance near lithium reactor banks. "Keep 'em alive," she told her exec. "If reactors blow, nobody wins." The Imperial dreadnought tried a desperate tactic, venting sections of compromised hull to peel away the forest. Vast plumes of freezing air and shredded foliage erupted into space. Several of Verdure Dawn's boarding pods were jettisoned, pinwheeling away like seeds on a gale. But enough roots had already latched into internal superstructure that the forest endured, gripping the ship with stubborn persistence. Imperial Admiral Cassian Holt, commanding Dominus Imperii, strode into his own bridge with a face like chiseled slate. He surveyed the projections, jammed sensors, turret blind spots, life support anomalies blooming across decks. Holt had drilled for boarding actions, though few believed the Garden Fleet's bio-warfare could outpace Imperial countermeasures. "Seal sections 34 to 90, he ordered. "Deploy flame teams. If it's green, burn it." "Sensors offline in 34, a lieutenant stammered. "Environmental control reports humidity spikes, unknown flora obstructing vents." Holt slammed a gauntleted fist on the rail. "Then reroute power to dorsal radiators. Fry everything." A shiver passed through the ship as reactor output surged. Heat flooded corridors, leaves blackened, curled. Some roots shrieked steam, but Holt's tactic came with a price. Thermal expansion cracked couplings, melted insulation, turned critical circuits into slag. In one such corridor, Erie's squad ducked behind a bulkhead as a conduit burst overhead, raining sparks. "Central heating's a bit much," Pollard quipped. Erie checked suit status. "We can stand it, their electronics can't. Keep moving." Soon they reached an umbilical leading to the command spire, sealed by an armored hatch with biometric locks. Dua produced a pollen canister. Its microscopic particles infiltrated the keypad, reading residual oil from Imperial hands, reconstructing fingerprint topology, and printing it as a glove of living cells across Dua's palm. The hatch cycled open. "Garden Fleet, always ready to lend a hand," Waxon whispered. Inside the spire, resistance stiffened. Imperial Marines in impact armor waited behind portable barricades. The firefight began with silent hails of metal flechettes, but Erie's squad answered with seed darts that embedded in shields and erupted into stiff bamboo-like spikes, prying weapons apart. Smoke vents filled with spores that numbed exposed skin, forcing Imperials to retreat or suffocate under helmets clogged with micro-roots. Minutes stretched. Every second, more garden squads advanced, corridors converted into arboretums, bulkheads blossoming, pipes bursting with creeping vines that drank coolant like morning dew. Back on Verdure Dawn, Leora watched the Osprey-class's silhouette. The dreadnought no longer looked sleek. It resembled a colossal log abandoned in a swamp, half covered in moss and broken twigs. But Imperial guns remained deadly. A lucky rail lance tore through one of Verdure Dawn's lateral branches, sending spinning shards of bark and sapcraft plating into the void. Leora gritted her teeth. A prolonged duel favored the Imperials if their reactors held. "Spool the crown," she told weapons. The crown was Verdure Dawn's last-ditch weapon, a massive seed sphere containing a complete, if miniature, ecosystem. Should the sphere germinate inside a target vessel, it would program entire decks into unrecognizable jungle. Deploying it too early risked killing Garden Marines along with enemies. Admiral Holt could not read her mind, but he felt the shift in odds. He opened fleet-wide comms, broadcasting on unsecured channels so the Garden Fleet would hear. "This is Admiral Holt to unknown horticultural commander. You have violated Imperial territory. Cease your invasion, withdraw your parasites, and I shall allow you to limp away. Persist, and I will detonate my own reactors, salting this space with enough radiation to sterilize your greenery." Leora listened to the threat. Reactors went critical often enough in war. Holt's threat was credible. She toggled a private whisper to embedded squads. "Sergeant Erie, status?" "We're 3 corridors from the command bridge," Erie answered through ragged breaths. "My cell network is inside their auxiliary data trunks. Give me 6 minutes." "You have 4, Leora replied. Erie signed off, turned to her squad. "We sprint." They advanced under covering fire from vines that ripped floor panels to create barricades. Pollard took a pulse round to the shoulder. His symbiotic armor sealed knitting flesh, lobolobed, that matured into a carnivorous bloom, snapping down on an Imperial's rifle like a hungry throat. At last they reached the bridge bulkhead, guarded by 2 autolaser turrets. Erie threw herself against the wall, teeth clenched. No biological trick could fool a machine's purely optical trigger this quickly. She keyed suit comms. "Spore network, spike now." The call went out through pheromone relays. Tiny filaments that had wormed into data lines injected voltage surges. The turrets hiccuped, optics flaring white, then drooped inert. Irie's squad breached. The Imperial bridge was hexagonal, with a raised dais where Admiral Holt stood. Officers whirled, shock rifling their faces. Holt drew a sidearm. Irie fired first. A dart that shattered on impact, releasing sporangi that etched his visor, blocking vision. He fired anyway. The round ricocheted. Officers lunged for alarms. Waxen and the Ashleaf twins flooded the tier with choking pollen. In less than 30 seconds, the bridge was theirs. Holt was still conscious, wrestling sticky vines. Irie approached, tendrils extending from her suit to pin his arms. "Tell your engineers to scram reactors," she said. "Do it or the forest deepens." Holt, blinded, spat swear words. Irie placed a palm on his cheek and released a mild soporific. He sagged. She opened a channel. "Captain Nemi, Command Core, secure, reactor control in our hands." On Verdure Dawn's bridge, a collective exhale passed. Leora signaled engineering. "Begin graft." Inside Dominus Imperii, Garden Fleet techs deployed a crystallis computer that interfaced with Imperial systems. It looked like a floating seed the size of a dog, and once connected, it pumped saps that encrypted command codes, replacing them with Garden protocols. Within 5 minutes, the Dreadnought's engines spun down. Weapons fell silent. The battle, at least here, was over. Yet war is never tidy. Leora ordered medical spores released across both ships, bioluminescent motes that sought wounded, whether Garden or Imperial. Green and white luminescence drifted like snowfall through breached corridors, sealing arteries, cauterizing burns. The Garden fleet believed conquest without nurturing bred only resentment that would one day root in vengeance. They preferred to sow kinder seeds when they could. Irie escorted Holt, now shackled with living vines that tightened if he struggled, into a makeshift ward and stared at the alien flora occupying his corridor ferns, glowing with soft gold, vines humming as they circulated nutrient-rich blood analogs. "You call this mercy?" he growled. Irie removed her helmet, revealing moss-flecked hair. "Mercy would be retreating and letting you die in vacuum. This," she gestured to biotic machinery repairing an Imperial gunner's shattered leg, "is coexistence. Tomorrow, perhaps, you'll see the utility." On Verdure Dawn, Rum had begun cataloging salvage. Admiral's logs, star charts, 4 classified cargo pods. Garden doctrine required justification for every harvest. Leora authorized only the logs and charts. The rest would be returned once peace took root. She gazed at the now docile dreadnought drifting alongside Verdure Dawn, its hull transformed into a patchwork of metal and wood, gun batteries peeking through curtains of leaves like startled birds in a newborn forest. A message flashed from Garden Fleet High Command. "Hold position. Relief vessels en route. Prepare for regrowth operations." Regrowth meant more than repairing Verdure Dawn's wounds. It meant seeding this region of space with habitats, turning scarred orbit into a sanctuary of air-wrapped canopies, hollowed logs repurposed as listening posts, flowering satellites bursting pollen to terraform barren moons. Every victory for the Garden Fleet was eventually measured not in ships disabled, but in ecosystems created. Night cycle began aboard Verdure Dawn, the bridge lighting dimmed to a dusk-like mauve. Leora walked the outer balcony, watching saplings on the dreadnought unfurl under starlight. She thought of the academy lesson, war as cultivation. She had never fully believed that until now. Her wrist comm chirped. It was Iria. "Captain," the sergeant said, voice soft with fatigue, "requesting permission to bury our dead aboard the Dominus Imperii. The route's there. They're ready." Leora closed her eyes. 8 casualty glyphs glowed amber on her panel. "Permission granted," she whispered. "Let them nourish something new." So, as dawn approached from the nearest sun, the Garden Fleet performed ancient rites in modern hulls. Fallen Marines were cocooned in seed pods and placed within the living forest that still clung to Imperial steel. The pods would germinate, weaving memories into bark rings, sweetening sap with trace elements of human hearts. Somewhere in the Osprey class's databases, Admiral Holt's staff were surely recording every indignity. Yet, they could not deny the efficacy. Life grew where death had tried to reign. A day later, when Garden Reef ships arrived, great wooden crescents trailing constellations of butterflies. The Dominus Imperii had already become an ark. Imperial crew walked its corridors under guard, but unshackled, breathing air perfumed by polyflower groves, drinking water filtered through root systems that once breached their hull. Some sat in stunned silence beside garden techs, learning how to coax a leaf into forming a chair, or how to brew tea from bark that tasted, oddly, of cinnamon and home. Leora drafted her after-battle report. In the section labeled Recommendations, she wrote, "Offer the Imperials a choice. Reclaim their ship once they can maintain its new systems, or accept relocation to Garden territory, where they might study the craft. Either way, keep Holt alive. A man humbled may germinate into an ally." She paused, smiled at the choice of words, and transmitted. That evening she met Sergeant Erie in verdant quarters that had once been an Imperial mess. They shared sap wine and gazed through a porthole where once a gunport glowered. Outside floated a scrawl of root tendrils knitting the two ships. Tiny lumen fireflies migrated between vessels, bearing genetic messages for future growth. "Do you think they'll ever see forests without seeing weapons?" Erie asked. Leora considered. Maybe that's the wrong question. Perhaps forests can be weapons, yet also homes. The difference lies in how long we stay after the battle, tending what we planted. A silence settled, made peaceful by distant photosynthetic hum. Leora raised her glass. "To tending." Erie clinked hers gently. "To tending." And across the wounded stretch of space where two ships had grappled, leaves rustled without wind. Roots pulsed with shared blood, and a new story took hold, one written not in ink or steel, but in the quiet insistence of green things that grow wherever light and hope allow.